stick together.
Yeah, well, very well balanced. All right. Can Jen, I'll check back in with you in just a second. But first, this calls the meeting to order, the Affordable Housing Trust, Monday, October 5. It's currently 8:36 a.m. We're meeting virtually. The meeting is a public entry, but an open discussion by ourselves and for one specific topic on the agenda. And that is the discussion of additional properties that have been identified for affordable housing development. You all may recall at our last meeting that we had a request that we put back to the steering committee, asking them for assistance in identifying properties and an order of priority for, if you will, speed to occupancy. The steering Rob Jeffers sent along an item that we have available for us this morning to take a quick look at. Jen will post it up in a second, share the screen. And that sets up a conversation because I also invited CHI to this meeting to discuss some options that they've uncovered. CHI has had a discussion with Rob Jeffers on this. All of this comes back to the very same thing, which is that within CHI's development of the Harborfront entity, they have a affordable housing commitment under the payment in lieu bylaw. The question is how best to execute that, or I should say the question for them and in front of CHI is how best to execute that, and it's one that the planning board has been working with. At the same time, we have the opportunity to weigh in as to those possibilities that best suit the needs of affordable housing requirements here in town, both on a current and a sustainable basis. Wow, that's I don't know that I used a comma. I'm sorry. In any case, Jen, if you would, as a foreshadowing of the conversation, and Rob Jeffers, who I can see online as well, would you post Rob's, or I'm sorry, would you share the screen on the item that Rob submitted to us, the slide, so that
Yes.
the rest of the team can take a look at this? And Rob, I'm going to turn this over to you for a moment for a description of what you concluded and how you got there.
Mm-hmm. I mean, while Jen's putting that up, what I can say is, so the Affordable Housing Steering Committee met, and, after the trust meeting, we discussed, I gave an update of what went on in the trust meeting. And what we looked to put together was, okay, what are the scenarios in which we can get quickest to, getting something into our affordable housing stock. And so this was something that was approved and voted on by the Affordable Housing Steering Committee.
I'm just still trying to find it.
I didn't have it up on my computer, otherwise I'd share it.
Yeah, I know. I put it on my desktop. That's what I was doing at the beginning, and it'll be just 2 seconds. So,
I mean, while she's talking, so one of the things we looked at is what are the different types of things that are going to, cause, time to be taken. So if you look here on the left, we have what are the options. The middle is the things that, need to be done in order for it to be put into the affordable housing stock. And then some HPP, housing production plan considerations, which I am happy to announce was accepted by the state last week. I think all of you were on that note, but that's the final step in the housing production plan.
And a very big deal.
Yes, very good. So obviously the easiest thing is to purchase a non-occupied residential housing and apply a deed restriction, because there it's completely private. The town doesn't have to get involved, and the only thing that really needs to get done is have a deed restriction put onto the housing, and we're done. The next we felt would be purchase existing occupied rental units, so everything's built. The challenge there is you may have existing tenants, but that would only go as long as the lease term. So whenever the lease was up, you could then deed restrict, going forward. This does have the potential negative consequence of the person being in there might not be eligible, or even if they are eligible, might not be the one chosen to live in that space. But just looking at the focus here was speed to delivery. Obviously there are other things to be taken into account. The next item we thought would be the quickest, next quickest is convert nonprofit housing. So this is stuff like at the Historical Society or things like that, where we'd apply a deed restriction. It's about the same timing. You need to wait for the current lease to end, and that would then allow. But we're figuring no lease is longer than a year, so any one of these would be less than a year to come in. That's our assumption, that the leases are less than a year. The next quickest we think is construct housing on private property. So obviously you would need to apply, for a deed restriction. You would obtain a permit and construct the housing. Now, depending on the situation, sometimes we would be able to count it in our housing stock as soon as we obtain the permit. It doesn't need a certificate of occupancy. There's different situations. So this one, it would depend on the exact situation as to when it would be counted into the housing stock. Obviously, our goal is to have places people can live. So the construct housing, obviously that takes time. So it's, that we figured that would be longer than any of these other ones because the units don't actually physically exist. We think the longest, and I know there was some talk about this in the trust, but we think by far the longest is construct housing on town property. I would say with the exception of the town property that's already in the trust, which is one parcel, anything else requires a town meeting to transfer it. So you've got a time lag there. You also have no guarantee that the town's going to approve it. And then that also requires an RFP process. So that's the time to create the RFP plus the time to get responses and then make a decision. And then it kind of is the same as constructing housing on private property. You need to obtain the permit and you need to construct the housing. So we think that's the longest time to market. So yeah, and it's also probably for the discussion we're having today, it's also the least definitive because it does require approval on a town meeting, and there's no guarantee that any particular property will be approved. If people have a strong feeling one way or the other, it could be voted down in town meeting and thus not a viable option. So I will stop there and answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, Rob. Questions from anybody? Anybody on the trust is?
Well, just the one thing, you said that chart was already sent out because I don't think I received it. Is it possible to send that out? It's a very concise chart that spells everything out. I think it's good if we could have that sent to us.
Yeah, Rob, Jen, would you just make
Yes.
sure that everybody gets it in a second email?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay. Now, to cue this up, I do know that CHI has had some conversations with the steering committee with respect to some fairly specific developments that for which you'll want to use the criteria you just reviewed. Okay, and if I may, Jen, is Ted Lubitz is on? Is George on as well?
Yes, I'll promote them both to panelists right now.
Okay, so at this point, I'll introduce Ted and George once again, and they can present some of the opportunities that they found. Good morning, Ted.
Morning.
Morning, George.
Good morning. Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you very much. I was just saying that it's tough turning 46
Again.
again and again. And by the way, if anybody really wants to know what that feels like, look at Ted. There's not a black hair on that head that's not natural. Okay, so um, George and Ted, we just heard from Rob Jeffers giving us the steering committee's review of those circumstances which would assist us in putting affordable units on the housing rolls, and in the variations on speed of getting them there. I also introduced the panel to some of the opportunities that the two of you have uncovered for offsite housing units. And so with that, if I may, I would like to turn the floor over to the both of you to bring us through those opportunities.
Sure. Ted has a chart that he can show some of the opportunities we're talking about, but kind of as an aside, one of the things that we did do based on our conversations with the steering committee was we went out and looked at the dozen town-owned parcels. The list actually was originally populated, we got from Habitat that they got 2-3 years ago, and then there was a couple that have been added. So we've gone out and looked at all the parcels we could identify, put some notes on it to whether we thought that they were buildable lots. I sent that to Bobby Egan the other day, so I'll follow up with him and we'll go around and further identify that list. And as Rob Jeffries has mentioned, that's probably the least likely scenario because of the timing, but it would make sense, I think, for the committee and the town to start looking now at some of those parcels and put them on the town warrant for next year so that, outside of our project, they could be worked on and everything else. Because there are, of the dozen or 13 I looked at, there was at least 4 or 5 or 6 that looked like very buildable lots and met within the zoning requirements that you don't necessarily need to have, but there are some definitely buildable lots, including 2 on Beach Street, 1 on Heather Drive, which is off of Forest, a big parcel off of Evergreen. So there are definitely buildable lots, I believe, that the town owns that could be transferred same way 808 was. But again, that does take more time. So Ted, if you could pull up your list of the properties that we've identified, and it's a combination of parcels that are on the market now, and that's an issue for us, of course, is for example, there's one that's available. It's could be 5 units. The leases roll over in December. We would have to acquire the property. So the issue for us, of course, is the timing of getting the local permits for our project and then acquiring something. Ted, do you want to walk through these?
Yeah. So George and I put together this chart that, again, just goes through 4 real properties. 3 of them have not been identified just because they're private transactions, but they are real properties that could be acquired today. And then we've included 808 Jerusalem as number 4, and then other town-owned lots. And similar to what the steering committee did, we went through and sort of prioritized them and put together what they could look like, and then some pros and cons as well. So the first one that George just mentioned is a multifamily property that's close to town. It actually is currently occupied, but like George said, leases roll over in December, and there are 5 units, all 1 bedrooms. We would be prepared to, deed restrict all of those 5 units. So there would be 2 more units greater than what our obligation are. So it would deliver 5 units to the town subsidized housing inventory. We think that it's, the pros would be guaranteed housing, maybe not on a date certain because you'd be waiting for the lease renewals, but there would be a deed restriction. So when the tenants do move out, they would be reoccupied with eligible tenants and come onto the inventory. So the town would know that those units would be coming, which we think, provides a lot of certainty to the process. It is existing housing. There, in this specific property, there is 1 tenant that does have a Section 8 voucher. So these units have been inspected and approved as, suitable for affordable housing. we think, sort of one of the cons would be that it is older housing stock. But it has been incredibly well maintained. It's safe, it's decent. And again, it satisfies the conditions that we know would be, having to make sure that it was suitable.
Excuse me, Ted. I just have a quick question on what you mean by old stock. Does that just mean it's an old house and it might need a lot of work, or?
No, just it's just older housing stock. So just it would be like an apartment that it is market rate housing. So it's but the building was built in 1880. It's been renovated over the years. I'd say it's very nice, and it's, again, people are living in it. It's market rate housing being rented as market rate housing, but it's not brand new. And then similar to all these properties, it would be subject to affirmative fair housing marketing plan, a lottery, and then annual administration and monitoring to make sure that the tenants qualify. So that's one option that is very close to downtown. That's that location. Second one would be a similar location. It is a property that we could essentially acquire a deed restriction on, but we would not be the owners of those units. It would be rental housing, 3 2-bedroom units, and similar to the first option, as residents moved out, new residents moved in who would qualify. And similar to the first one, many of the same pros. It's guaranteed, no permitting risk, ensures the number of units, the town would have certainty. The thing is, it would be 2 less units, so that would provide for 3 units, which, again, the first option would provide for 5. The next option is, this is not existing housing, but this would be new construction. So this is land that we've identified that is close to the train station. It would require a comprehensive permit. There are multiple lots, but we believe one of them is not buildable. So we'd be working through the comprehensive permit process to probably put 2 homes on 1 lot, but have all of the land around it. So it would be, we'd have permitting risk, we'd have construction risk, but all of that just takes time. But that would provide anywhere from 2 to 3 new housing units, and those would be for sale. We would look to work with somebody like a Habitat on those properties, just because, again, of the for sale nature and the services that we believe would be required to make sure that those tenants are set up for success in owning homes. So we'd look to bring in a partner on that transaction. This fourth option that we've talked about before would be the 808. We would partner with Habitat for Humanity, presumably go in on a joint RFP response, and then work through the comprehensive permit process, assuming that we were the winning bid, because it is a public RFP. There could be other bidders that come in, but work there, and we think that site could be anywhere from 1 to 2 new construction units. Again, that would be for sale. And then again, number 5 would be the other town lots, which similar to what George said, we think those are great to explore, but given the timing challenges, might not be the best fit for us at this point.
So all these projects are real possibilities. We understand that the town would like to see units put on the affordable housing stock as soon as possible. So the first few make the most sense. But as I said earlier, we have an issue of we're not just going to go buy something tomorrow because we don't have a local permit. So we will be talking with the planning board this week about how we maybe condition the permit so that it's contingent upon we don't get a certificate of occupancy until we have the minimum of 3 units that are approved by the trust and the steering committee. Maybe something to that effect. That's what we'll be looking to speak with the planning board about this week. And the other issue is on some of these examples where there might only be 2 or 1, we obviously need to combine it because we have a minimum requirement of 3 units to to get into the housing stock. So there may be a situation where we have 808, definitely could be one, might be two, and if it's only one or two, then we have to do something else. So I think the good news is that there are possibilities as of today, depending on when and if we get a permit from the planning board and what might be in the market. We're going to continue to work with the trust and the steering committee to ensure that we get housing onto the inventory. You know, for those of you that may not be aware of what our responsibilities are under their planning board, inclusionary zoning, it's either 2 to 3 units on site or up to 3 units on site or off site with a payment in lieu. Since it's not a payment in lieu dollar amount, we've gone further and we're identifying and ensuring that they actually get built. So we're going to continue to work with both the trust and the steering committee to ensure this happens, if we get a permit from the planning board.
All right, George, I'm gonna ask you to hold right there. I know we've got some questions. Jen, since I can't see the entire screen at the moment, actually, forgive me. Yes, I can. I see that Diane has her hand up, but at the very least, I'll poll each of you for questions. So if you don't mind, we'll start with Diane.
Thanks. I have two kind of very different questions. So in the properties that already have tenants in it, how does it work with a current tenant who might be eligible for affordable housing and wants to remain in that, remain in there in terms of the lottery and how that all works?
Ted?
My understanding is that that tenant would be eligible to submit through the lottery. So
Right.
they would have the same rights of anyone else, but they would have no more right to the unit.
Okay, that's what it's the
would.
more right, because that can be tricky, obviously, if somebody's
They would have the local preference, which is up to 70% of the units.
okay.
So they would, in theory, rise to the top of the line.
Great. And then
Rob
the other,
Jeffers?
Okay,
Rob-
so
Rob
we,
Jeffers.
yeah, we've spoken to the state on this topic, and unfortunately, so Paul Kears has spent some time. And unfortunately, you can't really get a straight answer. Like there's some people that we spoke to who said, "Oh no, we wouldn't want to force people out if they're eligible." But then when you kind of press them, it's like, "So would they get to stay?" It's like, well, and it kind of feels like we might have an opportunity to push for them to be able to stay, but there's no guarantee. And I think the way Paul described it is, they will figure it out when the question is forced upon them, but there's no answer currently. So we can work to try to keep people in, and I think that's what we would do if they are eligible. And there might be a chance that they could stay, but we don't know for sure.
Diane, does that answer your question?
yes, I have one more, if that's okay, Steve.
Go right ahead.
Just in terms of the payment in lieu, to George's final comments, because it requires a payment in lieu, do you have to basically make a payment in lieu, or can you substitute going off and buying a property and getting the deed restriction, or will the trust have to function as an intermediary on that?
Ted?
So we believe that there is an option to create the units off-site. And so I think that's what these would be under. Otherwise, Diane, to your point, we could structure around it and have the trust be the intermediary that the money would technically flow through. But I think the goal would be that, a lot of these options we would just deal with directly and then, submit the appropriate monitoring documentation. For instance, the first one on here, if we were to acquire an existing rental building, we would continue to own it, manage it, operate it, and bring in the professional services to administer it.
Yeah.
So it would sort of be one-stop shopping. We would do all of it. But we believe that you can satisfy it by doing off-site creation.
Thank you.
Okay. If Diane, you're good with questions for now? Okay. I'm going to move around the horn if you don't mind. Next, Tom Mead, anything?
Hey, good morning, guys. I do have a couple questions. Ted, on the annual research or monitoring, how does that work? Who would you contract that with, and within the town, then, who do they report back to, or who do you report back to? How does that work from the town's perspective?
So my understanding, and I believe Lauren's on, but the guidelines essentially make the town the monitoring agent, and the town would be, I believe, Lauren and her office. But they can designate a third-party monitoring agent as well. So it would be a third party. Think about Maloney Properties or SEB. I understand that there's another property in town right now through an affordable fair housing marketing plan and lottery, the project on 3A.
Yeah.
And actually, the state recommended that maybe you dovetail efforts together and create one master lottery, so that there is sort of a stable of tenants, ready, willing, and able to lease units when they come up. So that could be an option, but it would be a third party professional, company that does this.
Thank you. And then, did I understand you made a slight distinction between the first property and the second, where the first one you guys were talking about actually buying the property, and the second, was there a slight tweak to that?
Yeah, the second one would be acquiring a deed restriction on a property that somebody else owns.
Okay, so you guys somehow negotiate that the existing owner still owns it, but you get credit for providing it essentially, or arranging for it.
Yes.
Understood.
So those units would end up on the inventory.
Interesting. Okay,
Tom,
that's it for me.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Cindy Matheson.
Just quick questions, stepping back from where we are. Given the restrictions on evictions and so forth, do any of those existing residential the people that have tenants in them, does that come into play anywhere here?
No, it does not. Again, we're not looking to displace any of the tenants. And what can happen is that we can wait until leases roll over. So someone could conceivably be in there for at least a year, if not longer. Since our project won't be getting its own certificate of occupancy, again, if it's approved, we have local permits we have to obtain from the Planning Board, Conservation and Zoning. Then we have to go to the state for Chapter 91. So if these are all approved, our project wouldn't even start until next summer, which means it wouldn't be delivered for another year plus. So we would have almost 2 to 3 years before we would have to require to have those units in place. So the tenants that are in place now would have time to either submit to the lottery or find other options.
Got it. Thanks.
Rob Henry.
Yes, I had basically saying one of the questions that Diane had, but just to elaborate on that, I think that option of the 5 units should be really pursued, because you not only get the 3, but you're also looking ahead to get 2 more, because we're going to be in this situation of always trying to get more affordable units. And that one, since that was number 1 in their list, I would think that would be something we should, put some priority on. I think one other thing, but then before I do that, of course, I don't understand the thing, but I would think that since if I understood Rob Jeffers right, the question of an existing person in the home, and in fact, if they did qualify, it's almost like a squatter's right situation. Is there any way of pressing the state to be a little more definitive of allowing us to do that? It would make some sense.
We tried.
That's
Yeah, I can tell you, we definitely tried, but
yeah,
they bring bureaucracy to a new level. So
yeah.
nobody's going to give me we've multiple people, and nobody's really willing to say yes, this is the definitive answer.
Yeah.
It won't give the definitive answer until it's, I think, a actual real situation is put in front of them. But yeah, there's been multiple contacts with them, but
yeah. Well, I understand, but there's always hope, I suppose. And then on 808 since I've been, listening to the 808 since January. Is there any progress or any way we can push along this 808 with the habitat?
Rob, if I can ask you to hold that question, we will address it in just a few minutes. Cindy Amara is on the line with us as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep,
But
okay.
if I can, let me frame one thing up, and then David Pfeiffer after this, if you wouldn't mind, be ready with your questions as well. Keep in mind that George and Ted, as the principals of CHI, are not going to jump through a fire hoop for the trust or the steering committee as business people, because they're awaiting their permits, which in some respects are contingent upon affordable housing components, right? But they're still awaiting their permits. And I think one of the things that they have clearly laid out, but I'm not sure we're all catching on to it, is that until they get their permits, it's unlikely that we're going to speed forward. So while, for instance, the 5-unit building looks very attractive for speed to delivery of affordable units, the fact of the matter is that they probably wouldn't feel compelled to enter into a transaction until they had the go-ahead to develop their parcel currently, right? And that could take a while longer. That's not in our hands. So I just want to make sure that everybody's expectations on this are somewhat tempered. Okay? All right. David Pfeiffer.
All of my questions were about tenant displacement and have already been asked.
Okay, great. And then if you don't mind, I'll move on to Ted Carr.
Yeah. So, Steve, your last point I think was excellent. First, a comment. I think thanks to everybody for doing this work. I think it's great to see that there currently are some options, knowing that those could change depending on their existing permitting. I have one question about the private property. I'm assuming I know the answer. To get a deed restriction, do you, as part of that functionality, is a fee paid to the private owner? Is that how that works, or is it?
Is that number 2?
Yes.
Yes, a fee would be paid for that.
I see. Okay, great.
And then, go ahead.
The reason for that is because you're restricting them from getting market rate rents for it and such. So it's a negotiation like everything else is.
Yeah, it's good. Very good option.
Okay, Diane has a question.
I just wanted to make a comment regarding tenant displacement, because I think that is something, we want to be careful of. But right now it is in a market rate, somebody with a Title 8, sorry about this cat, somebody with a Title 8 voucher is in market rate apartments. So in fact, we're offering more, if this were to become a thing, we would be offering that person more protection actually to potentially stay in that place. At least that's how I see it.
Okay, thank you. And that may be, Diane, that may be a good segue. Cindy Amara, can you queue up for audio for a second? Do you have an opinion on Diane's comment with respect to potential protections in a market rate apartment going to an affordable status for anybody that's currently there on a Section 8 voucher?
I don't really. I think it depends on what kind of arrangement you have with the owner of the property in terms of the restriction. And if it's, if they put a restriction that there's affordability, it's really a function of the individuals qualifying to stay. So that's primarily income driven on their end, as opposed to where they're actually living. In terms of the Section 8, that's really a function of where they're able to use it. I think it really, I don't see it that way as one being more advantageous necessarily or more permanent than the other. It's really driven by the person's eligibility.
Okay, thanks. If you, George, Ted, if you don't mind, just hold on for just a second, because Rob Henry had brought up a question, and I think it's since Cindy is here, I want to make sure it's addressed. Cindy, I understand that we're we're still awaiting delivery of 808 to the trust. Is that correct?
That is my understanding. Last I knew, with the deed was being drafted up, and we're just getting the final documentation in line. But I
Okay.
don't think that that's holding anything up.
Is council on the other side moving along with any amount of haste?
It's not being slowed down, if that's
Okay.
the question.
Yeah, that is the question. I was trying to be kind, knowing who the other council is.
No,
So-
I don't get the sense that it's being held up with any sort of intent.
All right. The trustees, I think I speak for them clearly, are eager to execute that, because while it's been a topic of conversation, it hasn't been a topic of execution. So we certainly would like the property in the trust, which would allow us to engage anybody on the RFP in good faith. Without the property, we're wasting people's time.
I don't see there being any kind of intentional delay, and I will check on the status when I get to the office later
I
today.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. To the trustees, we started out the meeting, Rob Jeffers outlined what the steering committee had evaluated as speed to delivery for affordable units. And now there are some options in front of us. Clearly, speed to delivery may or may not include the CHI immediately, for the reasons that I pointed out earlier, is that CHI is also has a requirement before they can execute, right? They have to actually have an approved project. That's just business logic. So knowing all of these things, I'd like to hear from you, maybe a quick individual poll. And what I'd like to hear from you is this: if you had to support an approach, and by that I'm not talking about a specific property, but if you had to support an approach as a first step, what would it be? And then secondarily, what is your backup option? If you don't mind, I'll start with Cindy Matheson. Cindy Matheson.
I think I recognize that CHI has, it has to make the right choice for its business, but it would seem to me if there's an opportunity to work with them, that surely speaks well for cooperative town investment in the properties. And if it works beneficially to them, it would seem to be certainly beneficial to us to take advantage of their expertise and their contacts with Habitat.
Thank you, Cindy. But let me clarify my point. I absolutely, I think it's in the trust's interest to be able to work with Ted and George and their organization. I'm simply bringing up a realistic point that we could do an awful lot of planning, but if 6 months from now they still don't have their permit, we will not have gone any further. That's all. That's all. I agree with you. That we would be foolish not to seek to engage and roll with them. At the same time, we do have, and we have committed to our own objectives for delivering units. So is there a particular approach that you find most attractive? Because I would guess that both Ted and George are going to use these pieces of information, and I say this to each of the members, use this information in formulating what they might recommend for their affordable housing commitment, and bring that right back to the planning board. So I'm trying to get a sense of the board as to what our preferences might be.
Well, like Rob, I think pressing forward with 808 to start with, since we know that that's pretty close to being acquired from what Cindy just finished saying, seems like that's the one to continue to press forward through, as well as look at the other options in terms of purchasing the existing occupied properties.
Okay, thank you. Rob Henry?
Well, I think we're probably all going to say the same thing. I think we need to show as a trust, and I've been saying this for months, that we have done something. And the fact that we haven't done the 808, it's not that we haven't done anything. It's just that we need to figure out within the political system of how we can push forward and get, I mean, you're saying, the other Cindy said there's no holdup that she knows of, but yet it's just been going along. And it's easy for me to sit here and say, let's press further, but I think we need to show to the town that we're a viable organization and we need to get one of these under our belt. And of course, that's the first one. And I think then, and I completely understand the process with George and Ted, that they're not going to go out of their way to go crazy until they get their permits on theirs. But when they do, then I think that's the second thing that we really need to concentrate on, is one of those first two options that they presented. But just kind of put since we're in the basketball season, put a full court press on some of these things and not go from month to month and, and then say, well, they really haven't done anything yet. So, and again, I'm just being constructive now. I'm not trying to point any fingers anywhere, but it just, I had years ago, I had one experience with Habitat, and, if they're really interested in something, they'll go all out on it. So are they interested in 808?
Okay. David Pfeiffer. Okay, yeah, I see David's screen's blank for a second, so I'll come back to him. He may have lost connection. Tom Mead.
Yeah, I think pretty clearly it's 808. We're very much looking forward to reviewing a draft of the RFP from the standpoint of the trust. Ted's list went top to bottom, like what can be delivered the quickest. But I think, while 808 sits at number 4 on his list, it's number 1 on ours. Like, we own the property. All we have to do is get an RFP out, and we can start taking indications of interest from developers, including, Ted and George, to get that project going. So, like, from the trust perspective, 100%, it's 808 Jerusalem Road. We own it. We know we want to do affordable housing there. And we need to put the mechanisms in place. So that's far and away number 1. And then, it makes business sense for those guys, and it makes the most sense for us as well. If we get to a situation where the trust is actually funded, I mean, I don't think there's anything else on the horizon that, developers are going to be cutting checks to us. But from the standpoint of, like, what can we do? Then I think if we were funded, the very next thing would be to find a way to put our dollars to work to obtain some of these deed restrictions of existing stock. And then thirdly, you only asked for 2, but I'll give you 3. Continue our review of town-owned parcels and start to really think hard about what we might be able to do there. It's obvious that's, the steering committee has been hard at work on that for quite some time now. And, it's going to take funding. But to the extent we can continue their work, focus their work, help them, come to the final decision on if there's something to be proposed, like what would that be? I think, town-owned parcels, need to be looked at closely.
Thanks, Tom. Diane, have I called on you yet? I don't think so. Okay, and Diane and then Ted.
So my sort of bottom line priority is as many units as fast as possible. I think that I'm thinking in like 3 different buckets right now, and I'm trying to like merge them into one coherent thought. But from the point of view of the community, I completely agree. We own 808. We got to keep moving that ball along. But if there were an opportunity to get 5 units fairly quickly, and that would take away some of the money that potentially could come to us through the payment in lieu for 808, that would be another decision-making point. Like, so to me, I want to see as many units as soon as possible. So what are the easiest ways to do that? There's our priorities, and there's also, the developers looking for some opportunity to help us move these priorities along. So I'm kind of talking in circles because I'm thinking like, I would love to say that, affirm our support for, if that 5-unit transaction could take place and we could have 5 units by, the end, by March, let's say. That would be, to me, a huge win while we continue pushing along with 808. But the funding is the thing that's going to hold us back on 808. So,
David, Diane, so if I can summarize what I just heard you say.
good luck.
Yeah, well, it's actually 2 things. 808 becomes a touchstone for the trust, right? It cannot stall, because ultimately that becomes emblematic of the work that the steering committee will have done, that the trust will have done. All right, and any partnership we get in it would have helped us to execute. The second is you're still occupied, understandably, with the priority of numbers of units to the affordability roles. Okay, and 808 doesn't necessarily hit that button as hard as some other options.
Exactly.
Okay. See, I told you I could do it. David's back with us. So Ted, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask, I'm going to return to Dave and come back to you.
Yeah, so I think Diane really nailed it nicely. We need units. We need places on the rolls that people can live in and that we can call affordable. So what can we do? What are the things we can do that hit those numbers sooner rather than later? So leaning into that 5-unit option seems really appealing to me, while still figuring out 808. And there's going to be some hard choices we'll have to figure out, but 5 actual literal livable units versus 808, which is going to be awesome whatever happens there, but that's still something that needs to be developed and built and bid. I would lean hard into what's real and available right now.
Thank you. Ted Carr.
Thanks. Sorry about that. So I think overall, I think 808 is a real asset. I'm in agreement that should move, forward. But my thought on affordable housing is to create the best units at the best price and make it the best place for the consumer, the people that are ultimately going to live there. So I love the option of this other list that we've been discussing. I think that's very valuable. And it sounds like a lot of those locations are also very good places to put affordable units, for all the reasons that affordable units should be integrated into the community. So I like that. I like that very much. Broadly, as a trustee, I think anything we can all do to move the joint process along so that we have the best opportunity to execute on any of these options is in our best interest, to help these guys and others to just sort of move the process along with everything.
Okay, thank you, Ted. As for me, I share the view that started with Cindy, was emphasized by Tom, and so on. 808 Jerusalem is is emblematic of progress, real live progress that the town will have taken as its own initiative with respect to affordable housing. And so that has to continue to move along. Nothing that may come about in advance of that completion should in any way derail it or delay it. Having said that, one of the things that we has become very clear to us is we need to add quantity, and obviously quality goes along with it, but we need to add quantity of units with some speed, with dispatch. And we've got to be able to sustain those, so to keep them on the affordability rolls for an extended period of time. So, that's my view of it. I think what seems to be coming out very clearly as consensus is 808 has got to move ahead no matter what. All right. Keep in mind that we have some approximately $370,000 less anticipated liabilities, probably $350,000 in the trust currently. Ted and I met separately this past week to talk about other financing and funding capabilities. We've been approached by a local bank with respect to the ability for the trust to hold a mortgage. So frankly, there is an awful lot of opportunity that lies within our bucket list. Since it's not on the agenda, I don't want to get too deeply into those items, but I did want to make the point that we have a fair number of opportunities and options, and most importantly, we have a development company that is actively seeking to work with us. Ted, George, I hope what you can take away from this meeting is that there's a clear desire to move 808 along. There's a clear desire to explore rapidity for delivering affordable units. And as a result of that, I think if that assists you in your conversation with the planning board, I'd love for you to take the consensus of this conversation forward. Before I get off, I see that Rob Jeffers has got a comment. So if you don't mind, I'm going to turn to Rob from the steering committee.
Yeah, two quick things. One on this, and then just one heads up. I think it's important that we in the Affordable Housing Steering Committee and you in the Affordable Housing Trust, recognize we need to, I think, work with the planning board to give Ted and George, some direction of like, yes, this will be acceptable. Because I think to your point, Steve, they're not going to buy anything until they know that it's going to satisfy a permit. And it's like, I think it does need to come from us, and we'll do this in the steering committee that, hey, we back the idea of 5 units fulfilling their affordable housing, because we do know, because I've been to the meetings and these are public meetings, there is a diversity of opinion on the planning board. Some people on the planning board feel that absolutely there should not be something elsewhere. And I think we should give our opinions. Maybe we have the same opinion in our committees or trusts, and that's fine. I mean, our committee will come up with a recommendation, but I think what's also important is to, ask the planning board to provide clarity so we can move forward. It's like, so if we find out that, they have no interest in, giving money towards the 808 Jerusalem isn't a option at all in their mind, well, then we need to move, we still need to move ahead with 808 Jerusalem and just recognize that this isn't going to be part of it. So I think the more we can give clarity to George and Ted gives us more clarity as well. Just before I jump off, I see Diane's there, but I just wanted to give you guys a heads up that I had met with somebody and I'd given them your name, Steve, as somebody to speak to, and he might be well known. It's a John Chiavo, who owns 747 South Main Street, who's looking to do some potential rental units where 4 units would be considered affordable housing. I said, obviously planning board, but you should talk to the trust, and we're going to invite him to our steering committee. And that's more of a heads up that there's something out there, and that somebody who's reaching out to you is because I told them.
We'd absolutely entertain that. And Tom Mead just signaled a comment.
Diane had her hand up.
Go ahead, Tom.
I'm sorry, Diane.
Okay.
So I've got to make a clarifying point, which is, so we got to get this RFP out on 808 Jerusalem, completely understand and respect the fact that, Ted and George are here and we're all brainstorming to find the best way forward. But regardless of whether those guys were pursuing a project, we have to get, where's the RFP is my question. And then my statement is it has to move forward. If these guys, want to get in and respond to the RFP, that's awesome. That's great. But, 808 has to stand on its own. Like, I think we have to stop connecting that. It feels like it's been connected a couple of different times by a couple of different people, and I just want to make in my view, it's disconnected. We as a board need to push that forward, and if those guys can, put a proposal in that makes sense, then sure, of course, we more than welcome it. And so we are having two different conversations, and then I understand and completely support the idea that we need to make a statement to the planning board and to Ted and George to say what we would support. And I think that's the consensus piece that you heard as you polled everybody, Steve, was, those 5 units, Ted's list is properly, sort of, it's in the correct order. Like, we would be all for, off-site mitigation. And so to the extent the trust needs to make some affirmative statement or send a letter or something like that to the planning board, I'm 100% for it, 100% for it. But I need to make that super clear that, we have two different things we're talking about. And this, to some degree, I think goes to Diane's, like, I'm thinking in a couple of different buckets here. And to me, I had to speak up again and kind of say that again. 808's on its own path. We want to work with Ted and George. And then I'll speak for myself. I totally agree with the way George, listed out his priorities. Love to see them pick up something that's existing. And anyways, 808 doesn't fulfill their total, responsibility. So of course they're going to be looking for something else. So to get back to, like I said, finally, let's issue a statement. Let's write a letter to the planning board. Let's do something. This folds into, the other part of the conversation that we ran out of time on last time, which is our own internal review of the bylaw and what our suggestions would be for changing it or clarifying it, or whatever. So that's a conversation we really do need to continue.
Okay, so first of all, when Tom was making his comments specifically on points about 808 taking its own path and being its own project, I saw an awful lot of head nodding from the members of the trust, which is, if anybody does not agree with the baseline of that statement, then please speak up. Okay.
Steve, would it be appropriate under the situation to emphasize this, to have a motion of this priority and trying to move things along with 808 and the fact we'd like a couple of these first couple of suggestions?
Yeah, it might be, but if you hold that thought for just a second, Rob, it might be even more appropriate once we clarify what we'd move on. Right. So what I understood the members of the trust agreeing to, at least non-verbally, is that 808 takes its own path. All right. And in fact, it's on its own path. There is an RFP that is apparently, Lauren or Jen, advise please, but I believe it's to be ready for the next scheduled meeting, which is the 13th or the 14th. Is that right?
Oh, of
October.
Yeah, you wanted to do right. We wanted to do it then. We're going to do but we did this one instead. So yes, for that meeting, and I think Cindy has met with Michelle and myself and Lauren, and we reviewed it. So Cindy, I think we could have it done by then. I know that Michelle is pretty close. She was pretty close last week. So, and then we just have to have council review the language. So I think that could be done.
Yeah, that's, again, we want to move this along. It was very much tied to the point of transferring the land formally and so on. And then the second piece of that is it actually comes back to Tom. Tom underscores the idea that there are priorities for fulfilling the obligation. And they actually lay out very nicely and dovetail very nicely with the presentation that Ted put together, or Ted and George put together, and separately the item that Rob put together. Again, I'm summarizing, so if there's side comment or clarifying comment from amongst the trust, please speak up. Okay. All right. Now, Rob. Yeah, this is a good time for a motion.
Yeah, I think because Tom was saying it that way, I might defer for him a motion if he agrees on it. I just thought the idea of trying to provide something very affirmative to show to the town, to the selectmen, to the planning, everybody involved. Tom, do you want to make that motion?
So I'm not positive what the motion would be. So I think it wants to be two. Rob, in your comments, you said something about Jerusalem, 808 Jerusalem. I don't know that there's a motion to be made there. We want to review the RFP and get it out as soon as possible. If there's a motion to be made there, somebody can help me form it up.
Well, I think Steve was talking about, we're trying to show direction and try to show some sense of urgency on all this. And I think, I mean, again, I may be wrong, but just writing letters. But I think when you have it on record that we have discussed all these possibilities and that we as our board and our responsibility, we feel 808 is definitely number one on the list. I said before, you said it again, the fact that it should stand on its own. And then the fact that we really, if we can, to try to show that the property with the 5 units is also a sense of urgency once, it's.
Yes. So I would break it up into two. Again, I'm not sure exactly how I would word a motion regarding 808 Jerusalem, except to say, we'd like to see the RFP published as soon as possible. Is there a motion there, Steve, or?
Yeah, if you will, the chair rarely makes such motions, but in this case, for the idea of expediency, let's move it along. Moved that the trustees express their preference for priority development.
Classic.
I thought it was expediency. Did he phrase?
So classic. Welcome to the world of Zoom.
I bet there's some bad words. I'm going to fix my motion while I have it.
Anyways, so just, I can, secondarily, I do want to, so it's probably a motion. So my apologies. I'm not like a board guy. So
Tom, do you want to recognize your vice chair? Tom, can you recognize Cindy Amara, who has her hand up?
I'm vice chair?
Yes, aren't you? And
That's news to me.
Steve's frozen out, so you're now in command of the meeting. And maybe you can call Cindy.
Okay, Cindy.
Diane, I think it's Ted who is the vice chair.
Oh,
Does that mean I can't speak yet?
yeah, no, yeah, go ahead. And Ted's frozen too.
I guess I'm not going to pretend to be a mind reader, but I think what I heard the motion where it was going was that the board wants 808 Jerusalem to proceed independent of any of the other affordable housing obligations that have been presented today by CHI.
So moved.
Moved.
Second.
We just need a voice,
Ted's
a
our
roll call
vice chair,
voice.
so he needs to call for a roll call.
Okay, roll call. Let's go with Cindy first.
Cindy Matheson, aye.
Yeah. Rob?
Aye.
My screen is, let's see, David?
David Pfeiffer, aye.
Tom?
Tom Mead, aye.
Diane?
Diane Kennedy, aye.
I missed somebody, right, didn't I? Or Steve's not back yet. Anybody else? Did I miss anybody else? Nope. And I'm an aye.
All right. The ayes have it.
And then
Steve's almost getting on. Tom.
oh, Ted's freeze now too?
No, I'm with you. Go ahead, Tom.
So then I'd make the motion. Not exactly sure how to word it, but essentially to make the motion that as the Affordable Housing Trust, we do support the idea of off-site mitigation for the Cohasset Hospitality Partners. That they can provide housing off-site in lieu of on-site units and/or a payment in lieu, and that we would support them pursuing that in the order that they showed on Ted Lubitz's spreadsheet there.
It sounds like a fair motion. Yep. Second. It's moved
Somebody
and
to clear it up
seconded.
for me.
All right, we'll go in that same order again. Cindy,
Cindy Mathis and I.
Rob?
Rob Henry, aye.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Steve
of
wanted to put some input in, and he's dialed in
Go ahead,
on
Jen.
this
No
thing.
problem.
So if I could, Steve, if you want to tell me what you'd like to say, I'll reiterate it. Would that work? Okay. Okay. All right. So if you guys just mind pausing for one moment, I'm going to figure out how to get him to dial in. Okay.
Okay, very good.
Herein lies the downside.
Yeah, I was going to say, Diane, is this a good example of why
Yeah.
it'd be nice to be in one big room?
Yep, absolutely.
My apologies in advance for my dogs who snore. I don't know if you can hear that, but that's why I keep going on mute.
I have a unique thing too. My generator has been on for the last 10 minutes on its weekly test. I don't know if you can hear that or not. It's annoying. So hopefully you can't hear it.
Nope.
Just be glad it's working, Rob.
Yeah, no kidding. I'm jealous.
Talk about a peace of mind when you have one of those, because I've only had it for a couple of years. It's unbelievable when you get the forecast and the wind predictions and all that.
I was actually online this morning looking at solar companies that do solar panels, and because Cindy Matheson and Paul have they have one of those Tesla generators, which I think is not only attractive looking, but very, to your point, very comforting to know that you have generators and you can do it off solar. And
I'm sorry,
it looks like Steve's in. Yeah. Hey, Steve.
No, I apologize. Apparently, in Maine, internet is an optional item. So some bird's probably sitting on a wire somewhere. Can you bring me up to date on the motion that you proceeded with?
Yeah, basically, Steve, we finished up on your motion about the 808 property. I polled the trustees. Everyone was in favor of expediency and moving forward on 808. And then we were discussing a second option just before you called back in about, and we can catch up on that one. But basically, do you have a position on the first motion?
No, yes. Thank you very much, Steve Gomer. Aye.
Okay, great. So then, Tom, do you want to finish up on the second one?
Yeah, I just tried to actually kind of rewrite it. So I would make a motion to strongly support CHP in its pursuit of off-site existing units to fulfill its affordable housing requirement in connection with their Cohasset Harbor Inn redevelopment.
Okay,
And we
Ted,
would, and then I would put in the record or in the motion, a reference to Ted's chart, because I think we all agreed we liked their pursuit of that in priority from top to bottom.
Okay. So
Ted,
that's
in the interest of continuity, would you continue to run the?
Sure. Yep. So do we have a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Is there any discussion?
Only one, and that is I volunteered to draft a letter effectively executing motion as a statement of support from the board. I would plan to share this letter with each of you individually for comment before it goes, but the objective would be to have it in the hands of the planning board before their meeting on Wednesday.
I like it.
That sounds great.
Ted?
Okay, Diane? Yep, go
Yeah,
ahead.
could I just suggest that we amend that motion slightly to add the words to this effect with the goal of maximizing new affordable housing units for the community?
Is
Because I
that
think that's
everybody? Yep.
ultimately what we want.
I think that sounds fine. So as amended, there's a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
None here.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm sorry, I think we have to vote on the amendment.
Okay.
True.
Okay, so on the amendment, let's go, same thing.
I moved
Cindy?
it.
Okay. Is there a second on the amendment?
I'll second.
Second.
Okay, Tom. And Cindy?
Cindy Matheson, aye.
Okay, Rob?
Rob Henry, I.
Diane?
Diane Kennedy, aye.
David?
David Pfeiffer, aye.
Tom?
Tom Mead, aye.
Steve?
Steve Gomer, aye.
Ted Carr, aye. Okay, so the amended motion, and I think hearing no further discussion on the second. Anybody, any further discussion? No? Okay, so let's poll. We'll go again. Cindy?
Cindy Matheson, aye.
Rob?
Rob Henry, I.
Diane?
Diane Kennedy, aye.
David?
David Pfeiffer, aye.
Tom?
Tom Mead, aye.
Steve?
Steve Gomer, aye.
And Ted Carr, aye. Okay. Anybody else? Any other business? Or we? Go ahead, Tom.
So one thing I'd like to do actually for the record is maybe make a second motion, a more general one, to say this isn't specific to the CHP guys, but put something on the record that says, as a board, we want to continue to work towards formalizing this direction to amend the bylaw to include specifically the ability to provide off-site units. In other words, within the same meeting, so this isn't just an accommodation to CHP. This is an approach as a board we want to take. We think this is a good idea. Off-site mitigation is okay, and not just okay, but maybe makes more sense in a community like ours.
Would that be better, not better, would that be effective, Tom, if it were woven into the letter that we send along?
I think both. I don't know. Again, I don't know who reads the minutes of these things or whatnot, if it really matters, but.
Well, no, it does, because it formalizes the position of the trust. So it does matter.
Yeah, whatever you guys think.
I'm fine with that. Anybody have an opinion?
Again, I think we think down the road because some of these things are going to have to be approved at town meeting. And I think if people evaluating see a history that we're making progress, that's been my concern all along, that there's a perception out there. I mean, what are they doing? 808's been around and all. We know we're doing things, but I think today we had a real positive thing where we have really documented these opportunities that we have. We've got 5 good opportunities. And I do agree, which that we've all said already, to keep it separate, from the other group, just to make sure that we stay independent in case something falls through. So anyway, I endorse that whole thing. But again, I just want to do it from almost public perception to build a case so that when there is a vote at town meeting, they'll say, well, these people put a lot of work in and a lot of thought.
I see Cindy's got her hand up.
The only comment I would make on that is I think the position you want to take is commendable, and I think you are all very much committed to that position. But if you're talking about amending something down the road on town meeting floor, you may want to hold off on a motion just now until you get a better sense of what actually the options are or how you want to shape things, so that you're not necessarily committed to a particular course of action too early on.
Good point. Tom?
Yeah, then I would say for sure the thing, and I don't feel like the letter necessarily would box us in that manner, right? If the letter says specific to CHP, we support these guys in this way, and then kind of either or, Steve, however you want to draft it. But yeah, so I'm with it. I think, including that notion in the letter is better than making a hard motion now in the meeting.
I think that sounds, everybody okay with that? Okay, great. Any further discussion? I just thought I might just say, George and Ted, thank you guys for hanging in with us today. We learned a lot. And Rob Jeffers and your gang, thanks for everything you're doing. Anybody have any other thoughts before we wrap up today? Okay, can we have a motion to adjourn?
There's one thing on the agenda. How about the next meeting date? Do we need to address that?
I think we have it. Jennifer, do we have the next meeting date?
Let me talk to Steve again, because we did talk about, we moved, this is our normal, we had agreed on the first Monday of October, which is why I'm confused. And then I think he wants to have a second meeting to make it a regular meeting where this is just a one item agenda. So we do have a long weekend this coming weekend. So I had suggested the 19th. So let me just, does that work for everybody? Because I know people like Monday mornings at 8:30. So, and I know Steve had said the 14th or the 15th, but I think Mondays are what everybody agreed upon. So I just kind of want to stay consistent. And if everybody can do that.
Fine with me.
Yeah.
All right. So what I can do is talk to Steve later today and we'll confirm it. And then I can send an email out and then we'll do the same thing. Do it on the Zoom.
Okay. All right, that sounds great. A motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, second?
Second.
Okay, thank you, everybody. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Aye.
Thank you. Jen and Lauren, thank you so much for everything. Appreciate it.
Take care. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody.
Bye.